Hello, welcome to Recovery Demystified, a show where we explore our relationship to substances from a radical, non-religious, and empowering lens. Our sobriety is not a purity contract. It is an invitation to become curious about ourselves and find our own unique paths to growth and healing. If you've been questioning the role of alcohol or drugs in your life and haven't found the resources that you need, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hello. Welcome to Recovery Demystified. My name's Early. I'm so happy to have y'all here today. You guys, guess what? I'm so excited to announce that I am going to start offering one-on-one recovery coaching services. Honestly, for a long time, I was pretty staunchly against charging any money for anything because it's a really important belief of mine that recovery services should never be held behind a paywall. This shit can be life or death. And I don't think anyone should be holding it over people's head that they have to give money to be able to receive services. However, when I was holding that mindset, it was keeping me, waiting tables at a restaurant and then no one was getting recovery services. I thought last year that I was just going to be able to get grants and then I could pay myself with grant money and then I would be able to just offer everything for free. And as it turns out, it's really freaking hard to get grants. I got a few little ones last year, but I did not get anything significant where I was ever able to pay myself. And yesterday during my yoga video, I do yoga video every morning. It makes me feel so good. Yesterday during my yoga video, the mantra was I deserve, and then you fill in the blank there. And so I said, I deserve to be paid for my work. And it's such a passion project, but also I do deserve to be paid for my work. So anyway, all of that is to say that although I believe everything should be free, we live in a world where that is not the case. And unfortunately, I need money to live. And so far, I haven't gotten paid a single gosh darn dime for running this nonprofit for a little over a year. And that's been okay. But also, I do deserve to get paid for my work. So the podcast is always going to be free. The support groups are always going to be free. And our sober social events locally are always going to be free. And I'd love to live in a world where everything could be free, but my one-on-one coaching services are going to be sliding scale with just a couple of open spots for no cost, and the ones that are held open for no cost are going to be reserved for historically marginalized communities, so BIPOC, disabled, and queer folks. But other than that, I'm going to try to keep it as ethical as possible and do everything on a sliding scale. But yeah, there's a few spots open for that. I'm really excited to start doing that. And a link to find the 20-minute free consultation button is going to be down in the description. So yeah, super excited about that. And yeah, today's episode, I'm going to be talking about my experience with AA and why a 12-step approach was honestly a net negative for me. And not only was not good, it was bad. My addiction got worse when I went to 12-step. And I've been brainstorming this since I started the podcast. I've been I'm going to do an episode where I talk about why 12-step did not work for me. But then it turned into this absolute rabbit hole of researching all of the intricate entire history of AA and trying to make sure that I had every single bit of information that I needed. And then it kind of dawned on me that the reality of the situation is that I don't have to convey every single detail of every single moment of what frustrates me about 12-step and my experience in it for it to be a helpful episode. So I was just bite the bullet and just get out there and start talking about it. And if more comes up, I'll do a freaking second episode. But I guess I also just want to take a minute to say that I can look at the download numbers for the podcast and it shows when people are binge listening. I can't see what individual people are doing, but I can see the amount of people listening in a day and the amount of downloads in a day. And when the amount of downloads is a lot higher than the amount of people listening, I know that people are out there binge listening. So if that's you and this podcast is helping you, then it would be super helpful for me if you could hit that subscribe button, hit the 5-star button. Leaving a review is extremely helpful. And if you're able to, I have a Patreon set up, and the lowest tier on there is just $3 a month. And then also there's a website where you can donate one time in any amount. And there's a merch store if you want some of our Toad swag or our world famous Crackhead White Jesus is Coming t-shirt. Yeah, that's a bunch of ways. If I'm helping you out with this podcast, if you could help me out, that would be super stellar. Anyway, so I talk about this a lot, that being, queer, neurodivergent, having PTSD, being assigned female at birth, all of that stuff made my experience in the 12-step program just like not only not good, but it made it actually bad. And that's not to say that's the case for everyone. Like, obviously, not everyone who is queer is going to have a bad experience. Not everyone who's neurodivergent is going to have a bad experience. And also, I'm not saying AA is just bad in general and it's bad for everyone and it should go away. Like, if it's a program that is working for some people, then, I'm happy to let it work for those people. But just as those people's story of it working for them is valid, the story of it not working for me is just as equally valid. And anyway, in all of my researching, I was like, I'm going to have to find all of the details of all the history and be able to explain like exactly why every little bit of it frustrates me. And in doing that, literally, I just realized that I could read a few paragraphs out of Holly Whitaker's book, Quit Like a Woman. And my tagline on that is always, and you don't have to be a woman to read it. It's like a good book for anyone seeking to address their use of substances. So I just want to read a few paragraphs out of her book that talks about the origin and history of AA. Because why do I need to reinvent the wheel when she's already done this pretty succinctly? So she says, AA was the brainchild of Bill Wilson, aka Bill W., a white stockbroker from Brooklyn with a drinking problem. It was co-founded by Wilson and Bob Smith, aka Dr. Bob, a white proctologist from the Midwest. The story, and now legend, goes like this. In the early 1930s, Wilson struggled heavily with his drinking and found no help through the methods that existed at the time. Then one day in late 1934, a former drinking buddy of Wilson's showed up at the bar and told him he'd found relief from his own addiction to alcohol by finding God via the Oxford Group, an evangelical Christian organization. The story made a huge impression on Wilson, and not long after, he attended meetings of the Oxford Group, checked himself into a hospital for detox, took some hallucinogens, belladonna, saw a bright light, God, and was freed from his addiction. For a time, Wilson tried to carry the message of the Oxford Group and worked to free others from their alcoholism within the organization's infrastructure, but he found no success. It wasn't until Wilson met Dr. Bob and was able to get him sober that Alcoholics Anonymous was born, first from within and eventually outside the Oxford Group. Wilson took the framework being used in the Oxford Group at the time, 6 steps that eventually grew into the 12 steps, and birthed the framework for what we know today as the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. AA was founded on June 10, 1935, Dr. Bob's sobriety date. What is important to understand here is not so much how AA was formed, but who it was formed for and why the program worked for its members. These were not women or some other marginalized class of people. These were upper-middle-class white Protestant men in 1930s America. This was 10 years after women's suffrage, at the height of the eugenics movement, and 30 years before the dismantling of Jim Crow. The basis of AA's program is the same one that asserts Eve grew from Adam's rib. It's one where God is a white-haired white man who men talk to directly and women talk to through their husbands. None of this framework has been addressed, changed, or altered since. It remains intact as it first appeared 8 decades ago. She goes on to say, remember when I explained that AA was formed in the 1930s by upper middle-class white men who were sick from believing they were God, sick from wielding too much power in this world, and that the foundational beliefs of AA came from white evangelical Protestant organizations? Let's think about what that means for a second. Those who wrote the rules, those who sat and still sit at the top of society, a society made in their image and designed to protect them. They enjoy unquestioned authority and unchecked power, and their ego, or way of dealing with reality, was developed through this experience. Their ego was formed to believe it was above the law, above reproach, and that it was smarter than any set of rules. For an ego like this, the 12 steps and the big book made sense. To remind you, you are not God, to become right-sized, to refrain from questioning rules, to humble yourself, to admit your weakness, to chronicle what's wrong about you, to be vulnerable enough to admit your faults to another person, to shut up and listen. Those are all behaviors associated with and imposed on women. They are, in essence, instructions on how to be a woman, and to those men, they were medicine. To act in this manner was a crazy new way of being and felt like freedom. But to a woman or any other oppressed group, being told to renounce power, voice, authority, and desire are just more of the same shit. It's what makes us sick in the first place. And then later she says, when I think of what the disaster of recovery for women really is, it's that most of us come to it without the things it's beating us to deny. Women aren't sick from an overdeveloped sense of ego or a pathological lack of humility because all we've ever done is chase our desires. We are sick because we don't have these things, haven't done these things. We drink not because we have too much power, but because we have so little. And when we are told our problem can be solved by getting rid of and denying even more of ourselves, we are not given a way out. We are given the same death sentence of subordination. And I really deeply appreciate Holly Whitaker's book and her analysis and that just like very brief introduction of AA, because it's crazy like how ubiquitous that story has become, where AA is like the only game in town and has been for, almost 90 years at this point, that people that have no idea what's going on in that room are like, oh yeah, you have to go to AA to get sober. Like, it's the only way. And the fact that it is rooted in evangelical Christian organizations. And yeah, it's just like, it's extremely frustrating to me that it's a one-size-fits-all approach when it was written and designed to like tear down the massive overinflated egos of wealthy white cis men in the 1930s. And the idea that that can be projected onto all people as an appropriate way to seek recovery, it just super grinds my gears. And it was really validating, honestly, for me to read that chapter of her book, because I'd never heard that perspective before, but it felt like so aligned with my experience. And even though I don't identify as a woman, the majority of society looks at me and sees woman. So I like fill that function in society, even though that's not who I am. So her analysis of AA and its origins and how it's not for everyone. Yeah, when I first read that, I was just like, oh my God, thank fucking God. Like, someone is validating what my heart has been saying this whole time. And yeah, it's just like a really succinct little introduction. And her book is great. Yeah, I highly suggest people check out that book. But yeah, like all throughout my 20s, whenever I tried to quit drinking, I just tried to use willpower, and I was like, okay, if I try hard enough, I should be able to do this. And there was not a ton of other resources at the time, and I knew AA existed, but I just knew that it had something to do with God, so I've never went. And then eventually I got so desperate, and I think this is the case for a lot of people, where I didn't have any other options, and I was like, fuck it, like, I don't care what goes on there. I just need to go and try. And I was at my absolute lowest, like the most fucked up, sad, like suicidal, desperate moment of my life. And that's an extremely vulnerable place to be. And that's an extremely vulnerable way to enter into a program that is meant to like break down a person's ego. And yeah, it was really hard for me. So at first, when I went to AA, I actually texted the leader of the atheist AA group, and he found me a sponsor, and she was so sweet, and I really like enjoyed what she had to offer. It wasn't her fault. It was the program's fault, So I started going to meetings with her, and one of the first things she told me was that I should go to 90 meetings in 90 days. And that was like the first sort of like red flaggy thing for me as a neurodivergent person. So I'm autistic, and doing social interactions for me feels more draining than it feels enriching. And I also live really far away in a cabin in the woods with a really shitty car. And I was like, I used my car as an excuse. I was like, if I leave my house every day for 90 days, like I'm not going to have a car, and then I'm going to be totally fucked. But the truth of the matter is that my resilience is lowered by social interactions because they drain me. And if I had to go out in public in a room full of new people and experience just like the tension and anxiety that induces for 90 days, that would not facilitate a healthy environment of recovery for me. And I think that is the case for a lot of neurodivergent people. Also, assuming that a person can go to 90 meetings in 90 days like doesn't take into account the reality of the conditions of most people's lives, especially in modern America, where working class people have to work more and more and more to be able to survive at all. I just think that that's like a really privileged position to be able to say that a person needs to go to 90 meetings in 90 days. And for me, mostly the problem, was my neurodivergence and the fact that was not going to facilitate a healing environment for me. And in that same vein, my sponsor also encouraged me, or like made me basically talk at every meeting. And I'm sure there's some reason for that, but that also was really harmful for my neurodivergent experience in the world, because having to talk about myself in front of a group of people just really, really, really took so much energy out of me that it again just like severely lowered my resilience. And the thing about not using substances when we don't have a lot of skills besides willpower is that when our resilience is lowered, our willpower is lowered, and our ability to make good decisions is going to be really impaired, honestly. So being forced to talk at groups was pretty harmful for me and controlling and weird. And then also there was these like moments where we'd go in the circle and you're expected to call yourself an alcoholic after every time that you would introduce yourself. And that just gave me such an ick, because I'm a complex person. I'm like an entire human being with a bunch of like diverse and interesting characteristics about me. And just to be like, my name's Early and I'm an alcoholic, it gave me the ick, and it made me feel dehumanized. In fact, I've heard people, I think it's maybe even Holly Whitaker, talk about how the labels alcoholic and addict are eugenicist in nature, because it separates like us from you people or whatever, and it like gives people another like a subhuman label. And it just made me feel bad. And so I would just say, hi, my name's Early, and then I would talk because my sponsor was making me talk. And then like inevitably some grumpy old white man would like interrupt my whatever I was saying to try to force me to call myself an alcoholic. And so I'm already like going too far out of my comfort zone talking in front of these groups of people. And then instead of being supported or loved or, given the space to be able to speak and be vulnerable, I was interrupted, fucking barked at, and basically told to follow their rigid dogmatism or I wouldn't be accepted into their program. And I'm not the only person that this has happened to. Like, this is a story that I've heard quite often, and it's just like, I don't know. I mean, calling myself an alcoholic is dehumanizing, and then not calling myself an alcoholic was dehumanizing because an old man would be like barking at me, trying to get me to fall in line if I didn't follow his fucking dogmatic rules. And it was really fucking alienating. Just as a side note, there's this really frustrating part of the big book for me where Dr. Silkworth talks about alcohol addiction being an allergy. And I just like looked up a little bit about this man before I started recording, and he got his doctorate degree in 1899. And I'm like, literally, why are we listening to the chaotic ramblings of some random dude from fucking the 1899? Like this, I don't know. It just makes me so mad that this is like considered the main way that people need to be getting sober. Anyway, he said that people get alcohol addictions because they have an allergy to alcohol. But the thing about it is that an allergy is like your immune system's exaggerated response to a normal allergen. And, you might get like hives or swelling or something like that. But when we drink alcohol, it's not a fucking allergy. It's just like, that's just not what's happening. You know what I mean? If you had an allergic reaction to something, you would not go back and use it again and again and again with more frequency. So I just thought that shit was like super chaotic, that was even in the book at all. And in fact, I got a copy of the big book just to like go over it to try to prepare to do this episode. And I just like, it took me weeks and weeks to like bring myself back to it because it brought up such painful body memories of my experience in 12-step rooms. And I like highlighted a few things that illustrate what is so frustrating about it for me. And a lot of it is like, I felt so gaslit about the higher power thing there because people are like, oh, this isn't a religious program. It's a spiritual program. And your God can be anything that you want. Like your God can be a doorknob. Your God can be whatever. But they're fucking gaslighting you. And they say that they mean God with a capital G, because the entire big book says God with a capital G, him with a capital H. All of the steps talk about God with a capital G. And there's just like a bunch of super degrading, like I have religious trauma from being raised Catholic. And there's just like a bunch of degrading Christian shit in here. Like, thus I was convinced that God is concerned with us humans when we want him enough. Like, that is the same spiteful, hateful God from the Bible that you have to like repent and pray to. And like you have to want him enough. It says, simple but not easy, a price has to be paid. It meant destruction of self-centeredness. I must turn in all things to the Father of light who presides over us all. Not all of us need to destroy self-centeredness. Like, I came to the program absolutely beaten up into a pulp with nothing left of myself, no ego. It was all self-hatred. Like, I was not a fucking selfish person. I was barely alive, and all I wanted to do was stop hurting people and stop hurting myself. And when I read shit like this, I must turn in all things to the Father of light. That is Christian ideology. And if they're trying to say that that's not, that's gaslighting, and it's fucked up. And then there's all this stuff like, if you go back out and drink, you'll die. Like it says, faith has to work 24 hours a day in and through us, or we perish. And I think that attitude is extremely dangerous as well. Like, they tell you have to go to meetings for the rest of your life. And if you stop going to meetings, you're going to use again. And if you use again, you're going to die. And that keeps people scared. It keeps people disempowered. It keeps people not trusting themselves. The idea that we have to turn ourselves over to a higher power because we can't trust our stinking thinking or my own best thinking got me here. That stuff is absolutely so harmful, and it takes away our ability to be accountable to ourselves and accountable to the people that we hurt. And it makes us rely on an outside force for choices that are ultimately within ourselves. Again, from the big book, it says, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. His defense must come from a higher power. And that kind of shit is just like fucking disgusting to me. It's like, this entire program teaches people to mistrust themselves and to devalue themselves and to not have accountability. And that's just not the game that I'm playing. And there's this thing that they read at the beginning of every meeting, and I cannot explain how much this shit broke me the fuck down and made me so mad. They say, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program, usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. There are such unfortunates, but they are not at fault. They seem to have been born that way. They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. Their chances are less than average. There are those, too, who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. This shit, like, this makes me want to put this book in a fucking dumpster or a fire pit or throw it against the wall. The reason that AA doesn't work for everyone is because there's not one thing that works for all people. You can't force a spiritual awakening, and Like literally hearing myself, like AA didn't work for me and I kept coming back. I did everything they fucking said. And hearing this at the beginning of every single meeting that, oh, this program is so simple. And if you were just honest, it would work for you, you know? And if you're not, you're unfortunate. Being called an unfortunate was, oh my God, it's like making my blood boil right now. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that has had that experience with that paragraph in particular. And in the beginning, it was like only men were allowed in AA. And now, like, something that's super alienating as a queer person is they talk about men and women. And when they give people sponsors, it's like men are with men and women are with women. And queer people just don't exist, apparently. And also, it's like they pair men with men and women with women because they assume that everyone's straight. And that pairing cis men with cis men and cis women with cis women means an inherently safe, like, partnership with a sponsor and a sponsee. And to me, that's super frustrating because it just, like, invisibilizes queer people. It invisibilizes gender diversity. And it doesn't mean that there's just going to be a safe sponsor-sponsee relationship just because they're putting cis men with cis men and cis women with cis women. It just, like, I don't know, it's just so invisibilizing and frustrating. And there's ways that queer people have made 12-step work for them, but that was just like another strike for me where I was like, okay, so as a queer person, I just, like, don't even exist under this framework, which, like, you know, par for the course. It's like, it's fucking Christianity, you know, like, queer people are not welcome there either. Y'all, I literally did the whole 12 steps, like, every single one of them, and every single one of them made me feel shittier and shittier and shittier. Like, admitting that I was powerless. The thing about it, it's just like what Holly Whitaker was talking about, where it's like, society has already decided that I'm powerless for me, like, as a disabled, transgender, assigned female person with, you know, mental health struggles like PTSD. Society has already deemed me powerless. So the concept of admitting that I'm powerless, it just, I'm like, I'm already there. Like, I don't need to beat myself anymore. And it just, yeah, it's dehumanizing. And then the idea that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity, like, that's the assumption that I'm insane currently, which, rude. Okay, and then came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. So I picked Mother Nature as my higher power, and I do believe that she's, you know, controlling everything. But the thing about it is that I don't think I can say, dear Mother Nature, like, please remove my alcohol addiction from me. Like, that was never something I believed, and it felt fucking weird. And my sponsor had me, like, pray to my higher power in the morning and the evening. So I would always be like, dear Mother Nature, help keep me sober today. Dear Mother Nature, thank you for helping me stay sober today. And it's Christian ideology. Like, it's not adaptive to other items of importance. You know what I mean? And we literally had a little ceremony for the third step where we decide to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. And that was embarrassing. And then step 4, God, you make a list of everyone that you resent. And because I guess for the author of the book, resentments were like a huge reason why he drank. So then he assumed that that must be everyone else's problem as well. And the reason that I drank was because I had a fucking addiction. It wasn't because I was sitting there, like, resenting people. So trying to come up with a list of people that I resent was just, like, dredging up a bunch of old drama that I was not thinking about anyway. And it was, like, psychologically harmful for me to do that. And then after that, the 5th step, I had to go to my sponsor and tell her about everyone on that list. And the crazy thing that you do is, like, so you take everyone that you resent and then you ask yourself, what is my part in this? And it's humbling for people that need humbling. But I was there with my sponsor, and, like, the first person on the list of resentments was the person who sexually abused me when I was a child. And then I was like, how the fuck am I supposed to tell you what my part in this resentment is? And it really just goes to show that the authors of this program did not have experiences like that, because they're like, the examples on the list of resentments for them is like, oh, Mr. Johnson looked at my wife wrong. And it's like, bro, that's not my list of fucking resentments. Like, I had a different life than you did. And dredging up all of that old shit was just fucking traumatizing. And then after that, after I had to try to think of my part in all of the interactions, I made a list of my character defects. There was nothing more dehumanizing. I hated myself so much already that trying to list my character defects there was nothing left to be broken down in me. It all goes back to what Holly Whitaker said about this, a program meant to break down the egos of men in the 1930s. Like, this was not designed for me. This was not designed for a disabled, queer, assigned female person. I didn't need to be broken down anymore. And doing that intentionally over a period of however many months, it sucked, man. I drank more and more and more. And yeah, then it gets to the point where you like make a list of all of the people that you've harmed and then make amends. And that shit was so fucking awkward. And I really regret doing a lot of that now, because it's like, when you hurt someone, you don't also get to decide when the healing happens. Like, that is further disempowering to the person that was harmed. And I don't know. I mean, I don't think anyone was like, thank you, I'm really grateful that you apologized. Like, I don't think anyone said anything of the sort. I think it just led to a bunch of extremely fucking awkward interactions that people would have preferred not to have. Yeah, I mean, just doing the 12 steps, being in AA, I don't know, y'all. It just hurt. It wasn't what I needed. It was humiliating. Yeah, and then I think probably the most embarrassing part about the entire big book in general is the chapter called Two Wives. And it's a chapter that the author, Bill Wilson, wrote himself, and then he pretended he was his wife while writing it. So it comes off like it's supposed to be in her voice, but it's actually him writing it. And it's so cringe and it's so embarrassing. And it's under this assumption that men are alcoholics and women are their wives. And it's like, it literally says things like, don't be a nag or a killjoy. And it just talks about how the wife can support the husband. And if she's not supportive enough of him, she's going to get cheated on. And it's like, I literally cannot believe in 2026, this book exists and it says all of the same shit in it from that long ago, like almost 90 years ago, and people still are like, this is good and this is what we should be reading. It's like, it's just such a fucking embarrassment. Something else that I read that was really important during my research before I wanted to do this episode was an excerpt from First in the Family by Jessica Hoppy, and that book's really great too. I would highly recommend that one. But so I'm white, but it's really important to me to be anti-racist and to be in environments that are like safe for people of color. And she in her book talks about her experience in AA and how like it was racist for her. And I guess I just want to read an excerpt from her book about that, so you can just get it in her own words. There's no sign on the wall that says don't discuss race, don't say gay, don't mention rape. But there are special interest groups, meetings created to safely discuss the parts of our humanity not considered by the founders, two privileged, cisgender, heterosexual white men. In their desire for legacy, they created traditions that installed and perpetuated a majority rule which can and will police your voice if it threatens the comfort of that status quo. And that is up on the wall. Our Declaration of Unity. This we owe to AA's future, to place our common welfare first, to keep our fellowship united. For on AA unity depend our lives and the lives of those to come. Simultaneously, the program had taught me that my authenticity guaranteed my sobriety, and a betrayal of that self-trust got me closer to a drink. So I spoke my truth. After the meeting that night, a fellow came to me. She placed one hand below mine and the other above, creating a sphere. I felt held and safe, what I so needed in that moment. Finally, she spoke. "Don't call yourself that, dear," she said. "What?" I replied gently, ashamed of whatever awful name I'd called myself out loud. "A woman of color. We don't say that here. There's no color. How you referred to us hurt me a lot. We're all one. There is no us, them, or they. We're all the same, no matter color. We're all children of God." She pointed to the framed plaque that lists the traditions. Principles before personalities. You could cause a slip talking like that in here. Sounds like you need to study our traditions. My heart pounded as a tirade of rebuttals raced through my mind and settled in on my clenched stomach. "But I am," is all I managed to eke out. "I am a woman of color, and that's not an insult, nor is it a threat." Afterward, I thought for sure my non-white fellows would back me up, but still I was shut down. "Principles over personalities," my friend said, repeating in the refrain. "You know we're all sick and suffering." End of conversation. I was beginning to understand. She then goes on to say, "Self-medicating for trauma is considered a key risk factor for addiction. According to the National Survey on Drug Use and Health, among Americans with mental health disorders, 9.2 million also have a substance use problem. Every single person in my family suffered from a variety of mental illnesses, all untreated. With costs high and access limited, Indigenous, Black, and people of color rarely make it to treatment as they are far more likely to be criminalized for drug-related offenses. 80% of people in federal prisons and almost 60% in state prisons for drug charges are Black or Latinx. Black people who suffer opioid overdose are half as likely as white people to receive any follow-up treatment. The few Black and Hispanic patients who make it into opioid treatment, which provides access to crucial medication proven to ward off cravings, preventing relapse and overdose by 50%, do not receive the quality or duration of care that white patients are afforded. These qualifications, access to medication, namely buprenorphine, and duration of prescription, are the key indicators of success in clinical outcomes. And the discrepancies in treatment, duration, quality, and access to these by race and ethnic group are only growing, a recent analysis by the Journal of American Medical Association Psychiatry found. For most, the only option is court-ordered NA or AA. Racism and oppression are institutionally sanctioned forms of chronic stress with quantifiable biological effects on a targeted population. Weathering, a term coined by Dr. Arlene Geronimus, which I learned through the work of Dr. Nzinga Harrison, is the cumulative degradation of health as a result of racism and oppression. All our painful life experiences cannot simply be forgiven, forgotten, or prayed away. Our bodies have made something toxic with those feelings, something chemical, hormonal harm coursing through our bodies, cortisol. As your blood pressure rises, the prefrontal cortex, the body's command center, is bamboozled. Meanwhile, the amygdala revs like an engine with a full tank to crank out fear and anxiety like exhaust from the tailpipe. It's as if our blood were a type of gasoline and stress is a match, inflaming the body. I was right about being radioactive. For racialized people, this heightened perpetual state is directly linked to heart attacks, strokes, high blood pressure, diabetes, and substance use disorder. What killed my grandfather, what ails my mother, and what nearly killed me. While under chronic stress, you're physically not yourself, much like when you're drunk or high. You are hijacked. You're robbed of the opportunity to self-determine. The connection between harm and the solution, the reason we reach for escape through drugs and alcohol time after time, couldn't be more straightforward or more easily understood. In AA, all these truths were erased. It was as if the price of admission was one universal identity, the one that had perpetuated so much harm against me. Race-related trauma was labeled terminal uniqueness and dismissed as a false projection of my self-centered ego. The parlance of AA, an 80-year-old organization, was the greatest weapon of protection, colloquialism used to deny the fact of racism with the sanctimony of 12-step esoterica. AA was about personal responsibility. Collective irresponsibility was written many years ago, like the Constitution. It's your ego that wants you to blame parents, systems, patriarchy, I was told. Let's stick to alcohol. AA can prove insidious dogma and a dangerous place for those who are vulnerable. As I came into a profound awareness of what was happening to me, the program began to stifle my progress and stand in opposition to it. According to Dr. Harrison, the medical effects of racism are two-pronged, neurobiological and psychological. The chronic emotional stress of knowing you need the systems to survive while also knowing you are not safe in them is a feature of programming installed from the time of slavery and colonization. The result is hopelessness and anger, triggering the cortisol drip once again. The cycle blocks us from the state of rest required to heal, and not all people in AA are equally at risk. All of those social, cultural, political inputs are compounding the psychological industry that comes from racism and oppression, Dr. Harrison explains. At the same time, every single day, our experiences are biologically putting us at risk. The psychosocial, cultural environment is compounding that risk, and that's what gives you the outcomes that we have today. The first step towards a solution in Dr. Harrison's assessment happens to be the first of the 12 steps. Recognize and admit that you have a problem. And so the way that you do that is systematically is with data. If you are looking at the data cut by race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, also gender identity and sexual orientation, you're part of the problem. Because what you're doing is refusing to open your eyes. Because if you don't see the disparity, you can't work on the disparity. When we're beyond survival mode, that's when the most profound healing can take place. Which begs the question of my fellows. Who is entitled to heal? For the vulnerable, it's imperative to understand how a substance operates within your body, just as you must understand what part of the system is at work in your life. By naming the role of racism in the dysregulation of the nervous system and identifying how it causes you to turn to substances as a form of self-medication, you realize the false shame of moral failure. And that can inspire you to ask, do you want anything controlling you? My answer is no. And yeah, so I just think that her experience of racism in AA is a really important thing to note. And I definitely don't want to be a part of a program that denies historically marginalized people of the concept that their identity is. I just don't want people's identities to be squashed out for the sake of comfort of people who are not in historically marginalized groups. And that sounds like that was what she experienced. And her book is really great, and I super highly recommend it. Oh my gosh, I feel like there's so much more I could talk about having to do with this, but this episode's already getting really long. So basically, AA made me feel worse instead of better because being neurodivergent, I felt like being forced into the social environment like that was just really dysregulating and brought down my resilience at a baseline level. I felt invisibilized as a queer person, and I felt super fucking gaslit by being told that the program was not about God when it obviously fucking was about God. And the truth of my story is that when I went to AA, I felt worse every time. I drank more, and the process of like beating someone down that's already in a complex identity in historically marginalized groups is not fucking helpful, or at least it wasn't fucking helpful for me. And it's not for a lot of people. And when people see that God shit and they don't want to be a part of that, and they're told that that's the only way to save their lives, they're going to turn around and go back out into the street, into the arms of their drug dealer, or into the fucking liquor store. And that's why we need a bunch more things like adaptive programs that help uplift people and teach them to trust themselves and teach them to love themselves and find their own power. Like, if someone is fucking powerless in society because the society and the laws have deemed that so, like, perhaps they need a program of empowerment. You know, perhaps they need to learn how to trust and love themselves again, which is exactly what I needed. And I found it eventually, and I'm like really happy to be able to share my experience with other people. And man, this is a surprisingly hard episode to record, and I'm shocked at how exhausted I am. And I'm sure there's a bunch more things that I want to say about why 12-step is extremely frustrating to me, but I think that's enough for today. So thank y'all for listening, and I'll talk with you next week. May you be happy and free. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Recovery Demystified. If you like what you heard, share it with a friend or rate and review us so we can reach a larger audience. Recovery Demystified is produced and edited by me, Early Brunner. Stevie Pettit made our logo. Our beautiful theme music is by Logan Bragg, and our social media manager is Kaylee Bausch. We are entirely supported by your generous donations as a 501c3 nonprofit. You can find a link to donate in the description. May you be happy and free, dear listener.